Hi, my name is Destiny Cushing, and today I'm going to be showing an analysis of the New Yorker's content over the past year. My goal in this is to show how things have been going so that basically you can create a more informed content strategy. So for the first chart, we have the performance in organic search driven by organic traffic and organic keywords. We've broken it down by country. So I'm showing the US, Canada, the UK, and India since they're the top performing countries for the New Yorker's content. Some questions I have when I look at this data are what has caused the dip in traffic here in June and the subsequent spike in traffic in September? These could possibly be seasonality changes. Maybe they're expecting to see this every year. Maybe it's relating to school schedules. Kids go out for summer in June, they come back to school in September. What I would do here is honestly look at Google Analytics to see if anyone had left any annotations saying, hey, maybe there was a migration or a penalty or something on the site changed at this time causing these changes. And if not, then we would look further into the company to investigate these changes. The next chart we have here is a sunburst chart showing the total engagement and evergreen score by category and author for the New Yorker's content. So we have the evergreen score shown by the darkness of the shades of each section, and the total engagement determines the size of each author's section. So I'm going to start off by looking at the humor category. So as we can see here, Andy Borowitz has really taken over. He has the most engagement, but he doesn't have a very high evergreen score. We'll dive into that a little bit more later. The next category I want to look at is the news category. So I can see here that Mike Spies, Ronan Farrow, and Mallory Pickett all have darker sections, meaning that their evergreen scores are higher. And if we wanted to see exactly what it is, we could always hover over it and see, okay, evergreen score is 22.666, etc. So I did a little digging to see why they might have higher evergreen scores than their peers. And a few things that I noticed were Mike Spies has actually done a few pieces exposing the misdeeds of the National Rifle Association's chief executive, including an elephant hunt, things like that. We'll get into it more later, but this has contributed to his higher evergreen score. And Ronan Farrow covered Britney Spears' conservatorship this past year. So that definitely contributed to his higher evergreen score, as well as his total engagement score. And then interestingly, Mallory Pickett actually only has one article on the site. However, it talked about Sweden's lack of a lockdown during the pandemic. And apparently that was a very popular article that gave her a fairly high evergreen score, especially for just having one piece of content. And on this chart, the last section I'm going to really evaluate here is the magazine category. This is interesting to me because Jane Mayer has just blown away everyone else on this chart, honestly. But especially in her category, she has the highest evergreen score at 55, and she has the highest total engagement at over 197,000 engagements. That's for the year, but still. So I wanted to look a little more into her content since it's clearly quite hard hitting. So from here, we'll go to Jane Mayer's article performance evaluation. So we can see these are her articles over the past year. We can see the total engagement on the y-axis here and the evergreen score on the x-axis. So the first thing that pops out to me is this article in the upper right hand corner basically is the creme de la creme of articles and what authors are trying to do with their content because it has a very high total engagement score of over 340,000, and then it also has a very high evergreen score of 74. So basically we're trying to see what happened here. What is her secret sauce? So this could have just been a viral fluke maybe. However, she also has these other two articles here that have done particularly well. We can see there's an evergreen score of 43 for The Big Money Behind the Lie and evergreen score of 67 for Is Ginny Thomas a Threat to the Supreme Court? So her hardest hitting pieces tend to be about money and politics, and I would say that they definitely have contributed to her higher overall average evergreen score. And then we also see she has a few other pieces that just didn't pick up exactly the same way, but overall a fairly low number of articles on the site for the past year. In contrast, we are going to take a look at Andy Borowitz's article performance. So we can see this is at the same scale as Jane Mayer's, and we have the same kind of thing, same total engagement on the y-axis, evergreen score on the x-axis. We can see here that he does have one piece that went more viral than usual for him, as far as having an evergreen score of 37. So the engagement wasn't quite as high as some of his other pieces, but this is a high evergreen score for him. And what I've seen is that his most popular pieces are typically of a political nature. And if you don't know about the Borowitz Report, it's a satirical news column that talks about current affairs, political things, this and that, basically making fun of a lot of the popular figures in our culture right now. So a couple other pieces that did particularly well, as we can see here by their total engagement scores of 110,000 and 86,000, were also pieces with political underpinnings. So one about Fauci saying, oh, his splitting headache symptoms are a symptom of talking to Rand Paul, and another one about Ted Cruz and Obamacare and this and that. So outside of those, we can zoom in and take a look at the majority of his content. So typically, we tend to be more in this range as far as the highest total engagement being 110,000, but then evergreen scores usually, other than that one outlier, tend to not be higher than 16. So this is typically due to his more ephemeral content. The Borowitz reports tend to be very short articles. They're funny, they're easy to digest, they do very well on social because people can be scrolling, see even honestly just the title of a piece and get the gist of it. Either click through if they want to know more or just laugh at it, maybe do a haha reaction on Facebook, for example, and move on with their day. He also posts regularly, so we have a lot of articles to choose from here to see how his performance is overall. Next, we're going to look at content performance on social networks for all of the categories of the site. As a quick overview, we have on the y-axis the linking domains, and we have on the x-axis the total engagement, and then the size of these bubbles is determined by word count. So some things to note here are, again, the viral outliers. So this one being the criticism of the NRA chief's elephant hunt, which we talked about a little bit earlier. We also have Jane Mayer's articles that went viral. We spoke about them a little bit earlier, but they're also ones about money, politics, etc. And then we have another one here. This was Britney Spears' conservatorship nightmare. So this one we talked about earlier with Ronan Farrow. It had over 702 linking domains. Otherwise, we can see we tend to have performance for articles typically kind of around here. So I'm going to zoom in on that and we can take a look at these things here. So as we can see, we basically have most of the articles for the site are kind of within this social engagement that goes up to about 30,000 and linking domains being more around 200. So that's more the typical type of performance we expect from the New Yorker's articles when it comes to other categories, but their news and magazine and culture articles tend to have more outliers. Also, honorable mention to the humor category, Andy Borowitz tends to have some seriously high engagement, even though you can see the word count on these are very small. So we can turn off the news, magazine, and culture categories since they tend to be so huge. And now we can see everyone else is really low here. So I'm going to zoom in once again so we can actually get a better idea of what's going on here. So yeah, we can see that science tends to do kind of well here with COVID content mostly. This one is about COVID-19 lab leak theory, and another one is about the Delta variant being a grave danger to the unvaccinated, etc. We also see down here the Borowitz report tends to have fairly high engagement, but very small number of linking domains. So it doesn't tend to be shared very widely, but it does have that engagement. The next report we're going to look at is on social engagement by content category. So this is just another look at the same data we saw earlier, but with the dot plot we can really see how the typical content on these different categories tends to be in a certain area, but then we have a lot of outliers out here. So some of these outliers, let's say the news one, this is the botched elephant hunt. These are the humor ones by Andy Borowitz that we talked about earlier, the politically driven ones, and here we can see Jane Mayer's content that we talked about earlier. So these outliers are not really what we should be evaluating to see how the majority of the New Yorker's content does, but it is interesting to see how viral content can differ so dramatically from the usual content on a site. That being said, we can also zoom in on some of these categories without the outliers and get a better idea of the majority of the content. So here we can see each one of these dots represents data from each of the categories, and we can really get some interesting stuff here if we took a little longer to evaluate, but you basically get the general idea of seeing the usual suspects and then these outliers that just could basically throw everything off if we were trying to take the average of these numbers. In this chart, we can see a breakdown of the Facebook reactions to the New Yorker content over the past year, minus the data for the likes. So the data for the likes ended up kind of throwing things off because for so many years we didn't have these emoji reactions. So we just took that out, and now we're just looking at the reactions to see what content is so interesting that it's causing people to react in a way other than a like on Facebook. So the majority of the reactions to the New Yorker content tend to be laughing reactions, and we can definitely attribute that to the popularity of the Borowitz report. So I suspect that the easy to digest nature of Andy Borowitz's material basically leads to a lot of haha reactions, and then people can just continue to scroll on their phones. So similar to the way people react to a meme. The next biggest reaction is the love reaction. So this tells me that the majority of reactions to New Yorker content tend to be kind of to feel good content. And then the next biggest categories are angry, sad, and wow. So I would say the runner-up to feel good content is inflammatory content, usually in reaction to social injustices. This next chart shows a distribution of inbound links for the New Yorker's content over the past year. We've broken it down by category, and then on the y-axis we have the total number of links, and on the x-axis we've broken down the links by category to show how many only had 0 to 4 links, how many had 5 to 9 links, etc., all the way up to over 700 links. So I included this rug on the top so we can more easily see what these outliers are essentially. And we can see here, this outlier link is really throwing off the data so that it's hard to see what's going on over here because it has over 702 backlinks or inbound links. So again, this is Britney Spears' Conservatorship Nightmare by Ronan Farrow. It's interesting to me to see the data on this scale because it really shows that article has almost twice the number of links as the next highest linked article. It's not exactly, but it's just so much more than all the other articles. But that next article is one on critical race theory. So these are really kind of inflammatory articles. They're ones that get the blood pumping, people want to share them, and so then they are getting a lot of links back to them. So a couple other ones are how the Pentagon started taking UFOs seriously, etc. So I'm going to cut these out a little bit because I want to be able to take a closer look at the rest of these links. So I'm going to zoom in here and we can just take a look at this. So as we can see, the majority of content actually has, I'd say, about 40 or fewer inbound links, and the majority actually has less than 4 inbound links. So these ones that have more inbound links, they're great, they just are not the majority. And also another thing I'm noticing is that a large majority of this content is either news or magazine, humor, or culture. Especially as we go farther here, I'm going to zoom in again when we look at the 20 to 40 because that's another smaller category. Here we really have it broken down by news, magazine, and culture. So the humor category is out of the running when we bring it up to 20 inbound links. But this is really interesting because that shows the meat of the popularly linked content, in my opinion. So for these last few charts, I want to look at the top 10 authors for a few different categories. So this first one is looking at the top 10 authors with the highest total engagement scores of the year. So interestingly, Andy Borowitz has really blown away everyone else with 2.44 million total engagements. So that is definitely attributed to the Borowitz report. Again, the ephemeral nature of it makes it very easy to digest. It's very popular. If you go to the New Yorker's Facebook, for example, you'll see a lot of Borowitz report articles. The next highest engagement is David Remnick. He's been an editor with the New Yorker for a very long time, over a decade. And Jane Mayer, we've looked at her content, seeing that it has high engagement, high evergreen scores, etc. So these are basically the top players when it comes to engagement. These authors know how to write engaging stories that are interesting and really get people interacting with them. The next bar chart we're going to look at is the top 10 authors' backlinks. So these are the total backlinks for each of these authors. They tend to have really popular content that gets widely shared. So Isaac Chotiner and David Remnick, interestingly, almost tie for the number one spot here. When I did a little digging, I saw that both of them actually have content that comes out on the website weekly. So they have a lot of content. They're publishing consistently, so they each have followings, and their articles seem to get shared far and wide frequently. Other key players to note are Ronan Farrow with the Britney Spears conservatorship and Jane Mayer at the bottom here. The last chart I'm going to look at here is the top 10 authors' average evergreen scores. So it's interesting to me, none of these authors actually appear on the other two top 10 charts. So they tend to not have articles that are quite as popular when it comes to total engagement or number of backlinks. However, they consistently write articles that stand the test of time. So they're interesting, they stay relevant for a long time, and these authors deserve a serious shout out for their work over the past year. In conclusion, the top 3 categories that have seemed to do the best over the past year were news, magazine, and culture. The 5 MVPs who I want to point out as being in the top 10 charts for most engagement and most backlinks are David Remnick, Jane Mayer, Susan B. Glasser, Ronan Farrow, and Helen Rosner. These authors write amazing content that readers love to engage with and share on their networks. This presentation has been a 100-foot view of the New Yorker's content performance over the last year while diving into some exciting data anomalies. This kind of analysis could be valuable to any company though, not just publishers, and it doesn't need to be limited to annual reports. So in my opinion, the more data the better. Imagine what you could do with a monthly analysis of this caliber. Thank you for your time.